So these are the notes that we took today for our natural selection unit. We're talking sketch notes. So what you're going to need is a piece of paper. It can be lined or blank. It doesn't matter. Colored like mine or blank. It does not matter. But you need some paper, something to write with, and you're going to follow along with these notes. At the end, I'll show you where you need to submit them to me. So first things first, we need to define natural selection because that's kind of this big key concept we've been talking about. All right, we did our Donald Duck versus Daffy Duck lab to introduce us to natural selection. So let's define natural selection. Natural selection is the process of nature picking the best trait. I'm going to put a box around this word trait because it's another kind of key word we want to talk about and we'll define for some, not all, species to survive and reproduce. What's really important about evolution for it to happen is that the species have to survive, which is great. They got to live. But not only that, they have to pass on their traits. They have to reproduce. They got to produce more offspring. Otherwise, the traits stop there. So that's our definition of natural selection. Let's talk about what a trait is. So a trait is, simplest definition I can give you is basically, think of it like a characteristic or even a feature. And here's what I want you to think about. It can be something like a cheetah. Cheetahs are known to run extremely fast. Well, their ability to run fast is because they have the feature of really strong leg muscles. And those leg muscles allow them to produce more force off the ground, and that propels them forward. Other traits that cheetahs have is that their bodies are very thin, they're streamlined, which means they don't have a lot of bulky pieces put on. They're pretty smooth around. That allows them also to run fast because they're more aerodynamic. Elephants, traits that elephants would have to help them survive would be things like larger tusks on male elephants for fighting, a large trunk to be able to get food in different places, having a larger body overall, a lot of body fat and things like that to store energy. Those would be things that would help an elephant, traits that increase their survival. It doesn't have to be just animals. When we talk about species, I'm talking also plants, anything living, organisms like bacteria too count. Remember, you watched that Ed puzzle for me about bacteria and their ability to avoid antibiotics. Well, guess what? That's a trait to allow them to survive and reproduce. Natural selection. Cactuses. Okay, cacti have spikes on them. Those spikes are traits that allow them to survive and reproduce because the species is basically protected itself. Cacti can also store water, another trait to increase their survival. So that's natural selection. Let's do one more example, and this is involving what are called peppered moths. Peppered moths. My little notes up here. Okay, so peppered moths are these moths, that are peppered. No, they tend to be like kind of the grayish white, or they tend to be very, very dark black in color. Now they still actually live there today, the birch forests outside of London, England in the early 1800s. And these are birch trees, or as we were talking about in class, these are Minecraft trees to help you out. So birch trees, which tend to kind of be white with maybe a little bit of speckling on them. Not a lot. Now the peppered moths made their homes on these trees. And there were two types, I told you, right? There were these dark peppered moths. Okay. And then there were lighter peppered moths. And those are the two types of peppered moths that lived in the birch forest. Now the predators that decided to feast on these peppered moths, that was their primary diet, are birds. The birds are flying around, and I want you to be this bird. You're flying around about 60 feet, 100 feet in the air, and you're looking for a quick, easy meal, right? Well, between these two moths, which one's going to be the easier moth to spot that far in a distance? Well, on a white background, it's probably going to be the darker colored peppered moth. And so as a bird, you're not being lazy, you're being efficient. And so you're going to probably eat more of these peppered moths. On occasion you'll eat these, but more of these because they're easy to spot. And in fact, the numbers tell us that. We had 98% of the population were the light colored, and 2% were the dark colored moths. That's a pretty big difference. Again, natural selection, right? Nature, the birds, were picking the best trait. Well, the best trait in this case was to be a light colored moth because you were more likely to survive and reproduce. If you were a dark colored moth, that was the terrible trait. You had low fitness, you were dinner. All right, so we're going to fast forward. And we're still in that birch forest. Outside of London. But now it's about 1895. And London has undergone and experienced a phenomenon known as the Industrial Revolution. Industrial Revolution. Which means they started having more factories, building big plants that ran on coal. Well, if you've ever burnt coal, it tends to produce a dark smoke that creates lots of pollution in the air. That pollution started to build up on the trees. Now remember, there are two moths that live here, right? There's our dark peppered moths, and then there were the light ones. And so that smog starts to build up on the tree. And eventually, what do you think is going to happen to our moth population? Again, remember, predators are birds flying high in the sky. They're looking for a quick, easy meal. Something that's not going to require lots of energy. They can just, whoop, easy find, move on. Both moths still live there, but if you look at this, now as a bird, well, the easier meal is now the light-colored moth because it is no longer camouflaged in the tree. It actually sticks out pretty obviously. And we see that with the numbers. Now the population is about 90% of the darker ones, right? We went from 2% to 90%. That's a huge increase in population. Lots of reproduction of these guys. And only 10% are the light colored moths. That's a drop, 98 to 10. It's a pretty severe drop in population size. All because the birds were able to see the light colored moths now. And so you started building more darker colored moths, making more dark colored moths because they could blend in, they could camouflage. So now the best trait was to be a darker colored moth. It used to be that was the worst trait possible, but now it's better to be this. So what does this all mean? Let's summarize this, right? Let's do a bottom line. And again, you don't have to do all the little extra things I do with my notes. That is strictly for me in my little brain. Feel free if you want to, but that's just me. So bottom line, this is our little summary, if you will. Remember, natural selection, the process where nature picks what's the best trait to let some species, not all, survive and reproduce. So the trait this time was the ability to camouflage. If you could camouflage, that was the best trait. If you couldn't camouflage, you were dinner. And nature, as we always says with natural selection, they pick the trait. In this case, it was the predator. Predator was our nature, if you will, that picked what was the better trait. So the last thing we talked about in class was that all of these things, all of natural selection is dependent on an organism's ability of adaptation. Okay, I'm going to put a box around it because it's an important term. And adaptations are traits that increase a species' survival. Bottom line. If a species can adapt, they're going to survive. If a species cannot adapt, they're going to die. So if we go to London, back up here to London 1995, these moths learn to adapt. The peppered moths learn to adapt by blending in and producing more of the darker. They made more of these offspring. But the light-colored peppered moths started to die off, which is why that population died down. That's it for the notes. That's all we did. Put that back up so you can get that. You just need to, like I said, write this down in your notes on a piece of paper somewhere, and then you're going to insert it into the Google Slides, and I'll show you that in a second. All right, so you can find this assignment under Google Classroom. It's under this week. We assigned it today, so on Thursday the 29th. All you're going to do is after you've finished your sketch notes, you're going to come down here to the first slide, and you're going to insert a clear screenshot. I should be able to see all of the writing and everything, and sketch notes or picture of the sketch notes you took for today. You are not putting screenshots of the notes I did, but actually what you physically wrote out. And if you don't know how to do that, you just go to Insert, Image, select Camera. It'll give you the option to clear the camera, say Allow, and then you just hold your notes up to that, take your picture. If this doesn't work, you can also do it by putting it on your phone, take the picture that way, and then upload to your drive from your phone, and then you'll find the picture in your drive. And so every day you will do this. If you need more slides, you click on the last blank slide, and you can just say duplicate slide, and it will make a whole new slide for you. So that's how you're going to do this, and then you'll turn all the notes in at the end when we're done.